Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Chairman of the Milken Institute, Michael Milken.
Good morning. Good morning. It was 1969 in Philadelphia, and Lori and I had moved back there in 1968 to go myself to graduate school, and Lori later to graduate school at the University of Pennsylvania. And I wandered over because I had heard about this young entrepreneur who was in the medical school at the University of Pennsylvania, who was entrepreneurial, innovative, and undisciplined. The kind of student that the professor wished did not ask all those questions. And he invited me to look at the work he was doing as he was moving along to become one of the world's leading neurosurgeons on a monkey that day at the medical school. And I knew within a minute or two that I would not be a doctor. As he opened this monkey's brain, after a few minutes, I had to excuse myself. I told him I forgot I had a class I had to go to. So I'd like to introduce you to a friend of more than 45 years and an individual that is changing the world in many ways for all of us, Dr. Neil Cassell.
That was good, Michael. Thank you, Michael. Slide's not changing. There we go. What if we could improve the health and happiness of countless people who are afflicted with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease, epilepsy, OCD and depression, tumors of the brain, breast, pancreas, prostate, and so on, using sound instead of or in addition to surgery, radiation, and drug therapy. It sounds like science fiction, like Star Wars, but it's not. It's something that's rooted in reality. And it's called focused ultrasound, which is an early stage, non-invasive therapeutic technology that has the potential, and I emphasize the word potential, to revolutionize therapy to the same degree that MR revolutionized diagnosis. Focused ultrasound is the most powerful sound you will never hear, but it's a sound that could save your life. An example, this is a 6-year-old girl who was struggling with incapacitating abdominal pain and renal failure as a result of this enormous tumor that was filling her pelvis. She was operated upon, but the surgeons had to back out because the tumor was too bloody. As a last resort, on a purely experimental basis, she was treated in one session with focused ultrasound, and more than half of the tumor was destroyed. In 2 days, her pain was relieved. In 2 weeks, her renal function returned to normal. The way it works is focused ultrasound, multiple intersecting beams of ultrasound energy are focused with an extreme degree of precision and accuracy on a point, on a target deep in the body. And where each of the individual beams goes through the tissue, it has no effect. But at that focal point where the beams converge, there are a large number of effects on the tissue, including destroying tissue, delivering drugs in extremely high concentration, precisely to the point in the body where they're needed, and thereby minimizing systemic toxicity or side effects. or stimulating the body's immune response to a tumor and enhancing or augmenting the effectiveness of the immuno-oncology drugs. The fact that there are so many different mechanisms of action creates the opportunity to treat a whole variety of medical disorders. And today, there are, in various stages of development, more than 80 indications. 10 years ago, there were only 3. The field is growing rapidly, very rapidly. In the panel session to follow this on things that will blow your brain, there will be more discussion of these neurological indications. Now, when you see a slide like that with so many indications, it sounds like snake oil, whatever ails you, good for whatever ails you. But to be sure, focused ultrasound is not a panacea. It's not good for every indication. It's not good for every patient. The problem is that the evolution of a new therapeutic technology from concept or idea stage to widespread utilization as a standard of care is a glacial process, often taking decades. There are a number of fairly daunting impediments, one of which is lack of awareness. Well, the Focused Ultrasound Foundation has the good fortune to have as a board member John Grisham, and he had the idea that he could use his storytelling ability and his brand to, in one fell swoop, inform all of the stakeholders in this complex ecosystem about the potential of focused ultrasound. And he did this by writing a short 44-page book that he says is the most important book that he's ever written. More than 800,000 copies have been distributed. It can be downloaded online from these sources.
I always thought of it being an older person's illness, and I've always seen people in wheelchairs, so I thought I was going to lose all my mobility. Basically anything that required movement, I couldn't do it. My leg would bounce uncontrollably. It would hyperextend and actually lock backwards. It was very, very painful. I couldn't walk, so I had to be taken in a wheelchair to the hospital. With each treatment, I could feel myself getting stronger and stronger. My symptoms were getting less and less, and my pain was getting less. Then the clinical trial director, she looked at me and she says, "Get up, you can walk." And I thought, I can walk. It was amazing. I got there in the wheelchair, unable to walk, and immediately following it, I walked to the room. It was a miracle. The focused ultrasound treatment has given me back my life. I've been able to go on walks. I've been able to run, being able to ride my bike again. It's a miracle.
So that's an indication of the potential of focused ultrasound. And focused ultrasound is a prime example of a futuristic, somewhat futuristic or aspirational, non-invasive therapeutic technology. Let me share another story with you, something that's closer in. Intracranial aneurysms are small balloons on the wall of arteries in the brain that are prone to rupture, often with devastating consequences. In 1980s, the diagnosis of an aneurysm was clinical once it ruptured, and the treatment was a big operation, a craniotomy to clip the aneurysm, and the patients often stayed in the hospital for several weeks. The mortality and morbidity from a ruptured aneurysm at that time was in excess of 50%. Today, as a result of advances in technology, aneurysms can be detected before they rupture non-invasively with MR or CT scanning, and they can be corrected with a simple outpatient procedure where a catheter is inserted into the aneurysm and the aneurysm is filled up with coils to secure it. And today, the mortality and morbidity from an unruptured aneurysm is less than 1% compared to more than 50% for ruptured aneurysms 3 decades ago. Now, in 1988, I met then Senator Joe Biden because we shared a mutual and deep interest in intracranial aneurysms. And in the 3 decades that I've known him, I've appreciated that there is no one who is more authentic or genuine or decent. He is the ultimate role model for inspiring young people to pursue careers in public service. Of all of his contributions, the most important is likely to be his impact on cancer. By virtue of his force of personality and his strength of character, and his absolutely unique ability to convene and motivate people and organizations and institutions, and his Cancer Moonshot initiative, he has made astonishing progress as an individual in a short time in changing the culture and rationalizing the fragmented, inefficient ecosystem of the cancer establishment, and thereby accelerating the care of millions of patients with cancer. Parenthetically, Joe Biden is the only politician in Washington that I'm absolutely certain has a brain. Because I've seen it. Welcome, Mr. Vice President.
In his nearly 5 decades of public service, Joe Biden has been guided by bedrock democratic values.
Since I've been a 27-year-old kid, this has been the essence of my life. An abhorrence for the abuse of power, on the one hand, and the notion that everyone's entitled to be treated with dignity.
Born in Scranton, Pennsylvania, to a working-class family, Biden moved to Delaware when he was 10. At 29, he became one of the youngest senators ever elected. Joe Biden would represent the state for 36 years, serving 8 years as chair of the Judiciary Committee and 4 years as the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee. He was the primary sponsor of 33 bills that were ultimately enacted, and is particularly proud of authoring 1994's Violence Against Women Act. In 1987 and 2008, he ran for president. When he became the 47th Vice President of the United States in 2009, Joe Biden would oversee the $787 billion stimulus package, chair the Middle Class Working Family Task Force, and eventually lead the Cancer Moonshot.
It's within your power to fundamentally change and turn despair into hope.
I am pleased to award our nation's highest civilian honor, the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
I want to thank you all so very, very, very much. All of you for being here.
Hey, folks. Good morning. Good morning. How are you, man? Good morning, folks. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. I assume that's part of your morning exercise, having nothing to do with me, but thank you very, very much. My name is Joe Biden, and I'm married to that beautiful blonde woman that was standing next to me. I'm one of those guys, as my state of Delaware is divided north and south, and it's actually a southern state. It was a border state, and the southern part of the state that talk at you like this. And when I introduced my wife, Jill, the first time when we were engaged, there was a good old boy named Kurt Steen down in Dagsboro, Delaware. He just looked at me and said, "Boy, you're marrying up, way up." And he was right. Look, Neil, thank you for the introduction. As my brother Jimmy Bidden, who is here today, will tell you, that but for Neil, I wouldn't be standing here. And he went in twice. The truth of the matter was he couldn't find a brain the first aneurysm, so he had to go on the other side and check it out. The first time I met Neil was after I had the operation. I never saw him, but he was the head of the Department of Neurosurgery at the University of Virginia. He got called in to cooperate with a great guy named Eugene George, the head of neurosurgery at Walter Reed. And so my brother and my son said, "You got to meet him." I mean, he had already saved my life. And I remember rolling down, Neil, you may not remember this, rolling down the first time into the operating room after you docs told me I should say goodbye to my sons. And not goodbye, hopefully I was going to see him again, but you weren't so sure. And I remember looking up, and the anesthesiologist is behind me, and you go down, you count the tiles on the ceiling, as you're going in. And I said, "What are my chances?" And the doctor looked at me and said, "Well, they're good. They're good." And I said, "What are they?" He said, "About 30%. They're really good." And I thought, well, what the hell, man? This is really, I'm riding high. It's 3 in 10. I got to be one of them. But anyway. The funniest part of this is, and I'm taking too much time away from the important subjects here, but my son said, "Look, you got to meet Dr. Cassels. You've not actually had a chance to speak with him and spend any time with him." I was recovering. I was up and out of the hospital. And so we met him at a restaurant. My son said, "I've arranged to meet at such and such a restaurant." I walked in, and Neil stood up, and he said, "Dad, this is Dr. Cassels." And I said, "Doc, thank you so much." He looked at me, he said, "You remember this, Doc?" He said, "What do the angels sound like?" I said, "What the hell is this guy talking about?" He said, "You were dead for a little bit." Anyway, bring back a lot of good memories, Doc. Bring back a lot of good memories. Holy God. I'd rather be on the stage with him than the operating table with him. And Neil's efforts on ultrasound are really worth you taking a look at, those of you who are not in the medical field, and determining whether or not you should join this effort. It's pretty mind-blowing. But Mike, thank you for having me here. Mike has done so much. And this prestigious conference has grown in a way and has been around a long, long time and set the tone for so many other efforts around the world. This is like a mini world. This is like a mini Davos, the World Economic Forum. There's more CEOs here than live in Delaware, so. I used to be introduced when I was a young senator. Now, and they slip when I was out in another state. And now I'd like to introduce the senator from Delaware. Anyway. But anyway, this effort to advance progress in the fight against cancer and other diseases has made a world of difference for millions of people. And Mike knows when cancer touches your life, as it has his and mine and our family lives, it forces you to focus on what's important. And for Mike and for me, it's meant bringing a sense of urgency and to finding new answers and bringing new hope to patients and their families. Probably every one of you have been touched one way or another personally or a family member by cancer. The one thing every patient, no matter whether they have a terminal diagnosis like stage 4 glioblastoma like my son, or whether or not it's something they're going to be able to beat, the one thing they all need and the greatest demand is hope. Hope. They just need hope. You can't live without it. And it forces you to become a student of cancer and all its complexities. If someone you love is in real trouble, especially if you're a parent, I've lost a wife, I've lost 2 children, I understand. but especially if you're a parent, when you have a son or daughter that's in trouble, no matter how old they are, you, as a parent, you want to solve the problem. You want to figure out, learn all you can about it. And so I had not been a student of the subject. It's not a subject I would have chosen, but I chose my family, and like so many of you. And since then, I've been doing all I can to figure out what's holding back progress, to help bring about the change that's needed. And Mike knows about change. His formula 5-30-90 changed the world of prostate cancer research. A 5-page proposal, 30-day review, funding within 90 days, as long as you commit to sharing your data. I want to emphasize that point. Well, Mike was very early on one of those folks who realized that there's just so many silos that are erected in cancer research. You docs don't play well in the sandbox. No, I'm serious. You are the most brilliant, dedicated people I've worked with, and I'm supposedly an expert on strategic doctrine and foreign policy and a lot of complex issues. I've met brilliant people my whole career. I've met every major world leader in the last 41 years without exception. But I've never met a more dedicated group of people than those in the area of cancer research. But it's, when Richard Nixon declared the war on cancer in 1971, he meant what he said. He was sincere about it. But he had no army. He had no tools. And he had very little to move on. And so what happened was they also set up an institutional structure as how to go about funding this research. It was based on sort of a Jonas Salk model, that there was going to be one doc that was going to go in a laboratory and going to find the silver bullet. We thought there was one cancer at the time, and so on. But the institutions set up were for the last war, the war that was in the 20th century. And what's happened in the meantime, after 46 years, you've all made, the docs in the room, you've made enormous progress, enormous breakthroughs. But the institutional structure hadn't changed at all. You realize if you come to the United States government and you ask for a grant of $50 million to study the seventh ring of Saturn, and you finish your study, you have to publish it for the whole world to see upon that occurring. But you get $50 million to study proteins in cancer, and you do your entire study, you're supposed to report it, but you don't. Most don't. Most don't ever, it never shows up anywhere. And when it does, it shows up behind a wall of a publication that costs $160,000 a year to get. It's not shared very well. And so there's so many things that could change. That's what the moonshot was all about. When I walked out in the Rose Garden after my son had passed away, and my wife and I decided we just weren't going to run because I had planned on running, and the president walked out with this, I said spontaneously, it wasn't in my remarks, I said, I only have one regret, not running. I would have liked to have been the president to preside over the end of cancer as we know it. And that was it. And the president didn't say a word to me since then. And I'm sitting behind him at the State of the Union. He said, by the way, Biden's doing a moonshot. That was the first time I heard about this. No, for real. But one of the great advantages of being vice president to my friend, and he is my close friend, Barack Obama, whatever authority he gave me absolute authority. So I could hire and fire anyone in the government if they did not cooperate. Everybody knew when I spoke, and I had his authority. So we did two things. We put together in this moonshot, we arranged it so that we'd have a task force made up of all of the members of the administration, anyone who had anything to do with cancer, from NIH to the NCI to the Department of Veterans Affairs, et cetera. And we brought them all together because I had traveled around the world and around the country at every major cancer institution, met with thousands of specialists. And I tried to figure out, is there any consensus out there? Any consensus about what we should be doing that we're not doing? And there was an emerging consensus. And the consensus was that there was not a lot of cooperation and coordination and at the government level. And I made a commitment that I would break down any silo that existed at the federal level. I would force all these organizations to work together and to share information and to make it more public and available, et cetera. Change the way in which we do research grants. And as a consequence of that, I set up two things, this task force internally in the government, and then I went out and got a blue ribbon panel that included 30 of the leading experts in the world on research that come in and do a second thing for me. And that is that decide of the things that were promising out there, pick the most promising that have the biggest bang for the buck right at the outset. My dad used to have an expression. He'd say, Joey, if everything's equally important to you, nothing's important to you. So what with the limited dollars we have should we focus on now? And as a result of all of that, we came up with over 80 specific examples and changes initiated in the government and in private industry that is cooperating now. But there are too many to name, but I'd like to name just a few today. Because we brought the agency leadership together, the Department of Veterans Affairs and, for example, the Department of Energy, and people say, well, why are you bringing Energy Department and the Department of Veterans Affairs together? Well, the Veterans Affairs is the largest hospital in the world. They have more data. They have more human genome sequence. They have more tissue. They have more of everything. And DEO, Department of Energy, DOE, has enormous capability. They have the computing capability of 1 million billion calculations per second. Within the next 2.5 years, it will be 1 billion billion calculations per second. Imagine the possibilities of aggregating all this data, basically in one place or several places, to find out patterns. It's a little like astrophysicists mapping the stars. There's so much that can be done, but we weren't doing a lot of this. We weren't engaging in it. We actually got an unusual thing. One federal agency said, I'll give another federal agency money, so we set up a memorandum of cooperation between the VA and the Department of Energy to generate a dedicated network. So they began to work together. Now troves of VA cancer data can be assessed by the Department of Energy supercomputers to find new patterns, to allow researchers to make progress in diagnosing and treating patients with the same disease, but one therapy works on one and it doesn't work on the other. Why? We launched the National Cancer Institute formulary. What do you all know about AIDS? Well, we know that AIDS at first was this world epidemic. We had no way of curing it. Everybody looked for a drug. What did it turn out to be? Multiple drug uses, multiple combinations of drugs are the way we gained control. Try those of you who, and this is not a criticism of the drug companies, but if I'm drug company A and Mr. Harris is drug company B and my brother's drug company C, and you're a young researcher and you say, I think we can use a combination of each of your drugs to be able to deal with this particular cancer. There's now over 204 cancers you can identify. Well, it takes somewhere between 1 and 4 years to get cooperation in that. In the meantime, a lot of people die. Meantime, a lot of people lose hope. So drug companies are currently testing hundreds of promising new drugs in early research stages. It will cost them tens of millions of dollars to follow through on. So we come up with the idea that why not set up a formulary where each of these drug companies puts the drugs they're testing on the table, allows any researcher to come in and test in clinical trials a combination of their compounds with those other drugs on the table, figuratively speaking. Here's how it worked. And by the way, people say, well, wait a minute, we got to worry about our liability, we got to worry about our profitability, we got to worry, and legitimate points. So we had an idea. If you go into a bar and you wanted to listen to a song on a jukebox, you don't have to negotiate a license agreement for each song with the record company. They're already worked out. So you want to listen to Beyonce, you want to listen to the Black Eyed Peas, you don't have to have a separate arrangement with them. Well, the formulary, the National Cancer Institute, has already worked out the details for all of the compounds, intellectual property, access, licensing. It's already done. The process that could otherwise take years for researchers to do now just takes minutes. Started off with only 3 drug companies deciding to jump on. Now there's close to 15. The potential for breakthrough in time reducing time, which is all cancer patients want, is time. Time is potentially enormous, potentially. And so, those of you who are clinicians out there, unlike the researchers, and researchers breaking their necks, as I said, they're brilliant and dedicated, but it's the clinician who gets asked by the patient, "Doc, I know I'm not going to live, but doc, can you just give me one more month so I can walk her down the aisle, doc? Please, doc, can you figure that out? Doc, can you give me another 2 weeks? It's my first grandbaby. I want to be here. Doc, he's going to graduate. Can you get me by?" Folks, this is about minutes. This is about hours. It's about days. It's about months. It's not just about cures. It's about giving people some hope. There's so many things we can do. The Blue Ribbon Panel, they made recommendations as to how to take on major challenges in cancer research and prioritize a few large national projects to address these challenges because they had great promise, like a national program to identify Lynch syndrome. It causes colorectal and other cancers in people 20 and 30 years old. So we identify whether they have that syndrome. Instead of waiting until you're 45 for your first colonoscopy, you get it when you're 19. We can save your life. The measures of screening to catch cancer at earlier ages. That could be a big deal for a whole lot of people. We launched a 3D cancer atlas, a web-based catalog that can allow doctors to map the evolution of tumors and use predictive models of tumor progression and response to treatment to make more informed treatment decisions for patients. Those of you in the field know the first treatment, if you have the best shot with the first one, there's always 3, 4, or 5 alternatives. If you match the first one with the particular cancer you have and it's the best match, it increases exponentially the extension of life. But we don't know how these tumors progress many times. I'd like to tell you, I could go on and the 80 other things, the 76 other things we've done, but there's real movement. I'd like to tell you we solved the problems we've identified, but in the time we had, we were able to get a running start. And 3 achievements, however, stand out. First, we were overwhelmed by the public interest in the moonshot and the desire of people everywhere to be part of it. When we had our Cancer Moonshot Summit, which we held, 400 people attended at Howard University and 7,000 joined at nearly 300 individual summits held in every state as well as Puerto Rico and Guam. In that moment, we knew the moonshot had evolved from a program to a movement. And as a result of that movement, we were able to identify and grow new approaches to data sharing, clinical trials, access to care, prevention programs. Announced at the summit and throughout 2016 as part of the moonshot, there were more new actions and collaborations from approximately 80 private sector companies and organizations that ever occurred before. Again, to mention only a few, IBM, we got a call from the chairman of the board of IBM. Would I like Watson? I said, I could use Watson. But jokingly, I said, but do I want Watson, their supercomputer, to partner with the Department of Defense and the VA, the largest hospital in the world? Now you go in and get your cancer genome sequenced if you're a military person. And within a matter of minutes, Watson has read every single solitary piece of material ever has been written or spoken of as it relates to cancer. Can tell you for that particular cancer, there are these 5, 6, 2, 1 therapies that have been used. And these are the ones that had the best shot. Providing recommendations to physicians and tumor boards to choose the right treatment the first time. Cancer Moonshot also initiated what we call the Blood Profiling Atlas Pilot. I didn't like the way the acronym, the blood pack. It's like blood is contributing money, but the blood pack. God, they love acronyms in Washington. But representatives from government, academia, pharmaceutical and diagnostic companies launched a partnership to create an open database for liquid biopsies, blood draws, to accelerate the development of safe and effective blood profiling diagnostic technologies. Michael is funding some, and there's some of the great hospitals, cancer hospitals in the world now are spending millions and millions of dollars determining how you can find, just by a blood draw, whether or not there are in your blood detections of early cancer. To move sometimes a year, 2, 20, 25 years ahead of time to be able to detect and prevent cancers. You know, they're continuing to meet as a consortium. The fact that they came together just last month as a group to move this project forward. But it was initiated by getting people together in one room. An unprecedented level of collaboration is going on to drive real results for patients. We can do more together than we can do working alone. Secondly, I said through 2016 I would get an additional $1 billion for the moonshot. Now, the only thing I know better than any one of you in this room and anybody in the country is the United States Congress. I am a bona fide expert. No, I really am. I'm good at this. I am really good at this. And I was told that with the Republican-controlled Congress at the time in the Senate, in the House, we would never get any funding. But you know what? The only truly bipartisan issue left in Washington is cancer. And with the leadership of some really good Republicans like Lamar Alexander of Tennessee and Upton, Congressman Upton, he took this 21st Century Cures Act. And with only 10 days left to go, we only had 100 and some votes in the Senate, in the House, and 40 some in the Senate. We passed it. We passed it with 388 votes in the House and almost unanimously in the Senate. It's because we're able to make the case. And they actually appropriated, unlike anything was done last year, $1.8 billion in additional funding for cancer, but $6.8 billion for medical research. The Congress came together. There's a consensus out there that there are certain things government should be doing. The 21st Century Cures Act, as I said, had $6.3 billion at the very end of a contentious fight. So the generic point I want to make is that the public wants the government to do their job. And part of what they see as the job is doing things that make life better for them. And there's nothing that much that can make their life better for them than if we made significant impact on cancer, which touches all of them. And I was relieved to see the Congress, when the president came along, our new president came along, and he called for cutting all that money at NIH, all that money at EPA, all that money for research. We were moving into the know-nothing era again. The anti-science guys were prevailing. Well, guess what? We just had a budget agreement. He didn't get any of it. No. They actually increased the budget $2 billion more. So, folks, this includes many of the priorities outlined in the Cures Bill, including an increase of $476 million for NCI. People across the United States, that's what they want their government to do, to come together in a bipartisan way to address major problems such as cancer, opioid addiction, Alzheimer's disease. Because the federal government has a role in the fight against cancer, investing in these areas of biomedical research. That's the view of millions of Americans, advocacy organizations, others who had their voices heard in support of this legislation. And it's critical that we communicate to individuals across the country why these goals are so important, why they are real and relevant to their lives and the lives of their loved ones. If we do, the American public will continue to overwhelmingly support these research efforts, including the federal investment in research. And third, last April, I delivered remarks at a regenerative medicine conference hosted by the Vatican. And the Pope addressed it as well, and from people all over the world. And I laid out guideposts for international collaboration through the Cancer Moonshot, focus on prevention, access, affordability around the world. International response to cancer should reflect the same urgency we bring to infectious disease around the world. Remember when Ebola hit in Africa? The United States of America, the United States military, mobilized the world. The World Health Organization wasn't able to do it. We mobilized the world. We mobilized the world in infectious disease. Why are we mobilizing the world on fighting cancer, where if we don't make more progress, there are going to be 26 million people dying by 2020? So cancer needs to be mobilized. In 2012, there were 14 million new cases of cancer, 8 million cancer-related deaths worldwide. It's going to go to 22 million and 13 million dead unless we make some significant progress. Increased data sharing among researchers, institutions, foundations, support for standardization of data, and which is one of the things Mike has pioneered in. Increase government incentive of cancer research. Capitalize on this moment. This is an inflection point. Because what I learned when I went out there to deal with my son's issue was that we really had reached an inflection point. 5 years earlier, immunotherapists didn't work with oncologists or virologists. I mean, it was like a voodoo science out there. Not a joke. We've not only reached an inflection point here at home with all these disciplines are now working together, but the truth of the matter is the world wants to work with it. I'm going to end by saying I'm supposedly an expert on foreign policy and national security issues. That's where I spent most of my life. I'll give you 2 examples of how the world is changing and how I think we've begun to mobilize not just the nation, but the world in terms of the sense of urgency, the urgency of now. As I said, the Moonshot had 2 objectives. One is the urgency of now, and 2 was to change the culture in the way in which we attack this effort. And so the president, you may remember not long ago, before we left office, we had the national meeting of the 50 world leaders, heads of state, on nuclear proliferation. We sat in that grand room where the state dinners are held, in the East Room, and a great big rectangular tables put together in a gigantic rectangle. President with his back to the fireplace, my back to the hallway. And here's how we started it, deadly earnest. 50 heads of state. He said, ladies and gentlemen, I know you want to talk to the vice president about cancer. It was deadly earnest because that's what they wanted to talk about. But let's deal with nuclear proliferation first. It's a serious comment. I'm in Abu Dhabi with MBZ, the head of that country, talking about ISIS. They call it Daesh in the Middle East, something I supposedly know a lot about. I have my entire national security team. We're sitting on the shore of the Persian Gulf under his tent. He has 6 of his experts, and I got 6 of mine. We're going to begin how do we deal with ISIS? And he starts off and he says, in my word last year, before we begin, can we talk about cancer, Mr. Vice President? Can we talk about cancer? I was able to get 10 countries to sign memorandum of understanding with the United States, sharing data from China to Australia, to Israel, to Jordan, to Abu Dhabi, to around the world. To share data, advance research, and find new answers for patients around the globe, and make it all open, all available. Folks, on all these fronts, our work is just beginning. The Cancer Moonshot generated a great deal of momentum, and there's new hope for those who face this terrible disease. We made significant progress building on the work of many of you have been at for a long, long time, like Mike, but we have yet to win. And so all of us involved are not going away. We got to continue this sense of the urgency of now and continue to change the culture. Encouraged by some of the leading experts I've been asked whether I would continue this effort. By the way, I have no expertise. The only thing I'm relatively good at is convening people and shaming people. You think I'm kidding? I'm not. Because all of a sudden we have a lot of sharing going on that wasn't sharing before. Because it's needed. And so a group of people like David Agus at USC, Eric Lander at the Broad Institute, people of consequence like Elizabeth Jaffe, an international leader in developing immune-based therapies at Johns Hopkins, CEOs of biopharmaceutical companies. 30 of these people came to me in Washington and asked whether or not I would continue the moonshot since it's not being picked up by the administration. And so we're going to do that. And there's going to be we're setting up with McKinsey putting together an organization, the Bidden Cancer Initiative. And again, I'm no expert. I'm not the guy that is going to come up with the answers, but I've been around long enough institutions to know when institutions don't function and how they should be reorganized to be able to get more product more quickly. And so I am optimistic. Conclude by saying, I look forward to the day you're a young woman, when you take your children, if you have children, to get their physical for starting school, and they're going to get a shot for measles and mumps and other diseases. You'll also be getting a shot preventing cancer, preventing certain, like we can now with HPV. It's all on the horizon. I look forward to the day you're going to see where most of the cancers that exist today are be turned into chronic diseases. And we have serious, serious cures for other cancers. It's all there. I look forward to the day when you get the right therapy the first time, the very first time. You see the day when prevention is more effective, when care is personalized, and with less harmful side effects. I see the day that those of you in your room are engaged in the ability to be able to expose your children, your families to preventative actions, vaccinations, as I said. You can, the day when be able to identify through markers in the blood, cancers that haven't yet developed. We're on the verge of that. We're close. Or to catch cancer when it's most treatable, to identify early signals of cancer. Look, I could go on, but I don't want to get a little too passionate about this, and I know this conference runs on military time here. So, but look, the one thing I can tell you is there's hope. And there's nothing more that can bring hope than the breakdown of silos and that prevent greater collaboration. President Kennedy described sending humankind to the moon. And he talked about a lot of things, and all of you remember from kids in grade school and high school parts of those speech. The one sentence in the speech that has stuck with me in my whole career, he said, we're making this commitment because the American people are, quote, unwilling to postpone. Unwilling to postpone. I am unwilling to postpone any longer the actions we have to take to bring this together. That's the small contribution I hope I can make. It's the brilliant minds in this audience are going to find the answers. But in this fight, we have to be unwilling to postpone. There's an awful lot of hope, folks. And we need your help badly. Thank you for listening. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you. Am I here? I tried to shorten it. I think I was making it longer. Over here. Now comes the exam.
Well, Mr. Vice President, I thought maybe we'd start on a little different footing today.
Why does that not surprise me about you?
And many people know about your public life. And I think one of the things you can let them know about is when you were a little kid, you had a stutter. And we have plenty of children and others that have had something that they've been teased about or held back about. And here we have a person that had a stutter who became the Vice President of the United States. And I'm sure when you're young, you know, the kids don't really have the filtering mechanisms. They probably had a few different names for you at that period of time. Take us back there.
Well, I had a very bad stutter. I would talk like this, and I would be able to get things out and so my stutter. The part that bothered me most about my stutter is stutterers who are bad stutterers contort the face when they stutter, and you feel like a fool. And I thought it was, and you know, and I was a little kid, small in stature, and so it was my nicknames were. I was a runner-up in the state scoring champion in football, and my nickname was Dash. Everybody thought it was because. If you didn't know, but my classmates called me Dash because of like Morse code, ... dash, dash, dash. No, I'm serious. But what I had, it turned out, Michael, to be the best thing that ever happened to me. My mother, God love her, was one of those moms that, and I mean this sincerely, my brothers here, every kid in the neighborhood wanted my mom to be their mom. You know, the worst part growing up is I never worried whether my mother understood me. I knew she understood me, which means I got away with nothing. But at any rate, but what it did was it made me realize intuitively that everybody has something that they cannot, that's not their fault. They can't control. They're tall, short, skinny, fat. They have a cleft lip. They have a club foot. They have something that they deal with. And children are tough and mean. That's why I learned to fight. I used to have a bad temper until Neil took the temper nerve out of my head. But what it did for me, Michael, it gave me a perspective that. And a sense of empathy that I'm not sure I would have had before. We have an expression in my family, and it's you can never say anything about anyone else in an argument, friend or foe, that's true. So if the person you're having an argument with as a kid is homely, you can't say you're ugly. You can't say you're fat. You can't say you're stupid if they are fat, stupid, or whatever. I really mean it. The expression was, you can never call a fat person fat. You're never able to say the thing that was true that child or that individual could not control. And it turned out that being raised that way and knowing that has had a profound positive impact on my ability to deal in public life and to negotiate and to not question motive about other people, question judgment, not their motive. And I think it's one of the reasons why I'll say it's self-serving, but if you notice, every time there was any trouble in the administration, I was the guy that went to the Congress. Any trouble with a foreign leader, I was the guy that gets sent. Because I learned a lesson early on that it's never appropriate to question judgment. Just like it's never appropriate to attack someone for something that they cannot control. And that's why I've been involved in the National Stuttering Association, because think about it. The few times I've talked about this publicly, is when I go through how I used to stutter, people will laugh in the audience. It'll be, you know, it's kind of funny. But if I were describing I had a withered arm that I had to deal with, no one would laugh. If I talked about I had a club foot or I had a serious impediment that was physical, no one would laugh. But stuttering is the only thing you all, not you, you editorially think you can still laugh about. But it's the single most debilitating impediment you can have. Because when you stutter, people think you're not smart. People think that you can't control yourself. And it's awful hard when you're a junior or senior in high school to ask the pretty girl, would you go to the prom with me? And it saps self-confidence. How many of you saw The King's Speech, the movie? Well, you know, when that scene came on, my wife, who didn't know me when I stuttered, I still occasionally stutter, but when that scene him at the racetrack came on, I didn't realize I must have physically tightened. And she reached over and said, "Are you okay?" It brought back everything to me. The director of that movie, you know, when I do my speeches, see how I mark them up? He learned that I mark my speeches so that you can get a cadence when you are speaking, so you do not let yourself get into a position where you lose control. And that's, if you remember in that speech, and he sent me a copy, the actual speech the king made, where he marked up the speech. And so for me, it's been a constant reminder of not only my multiple frailties, but that a lot of people go through an awful lot, and some of it can have profound impact on their image of themselves. But I was one of those kids who was lucky. We couldn't afford any professional help, and I'll end with this. My mother, every time I'd walk out of the house and I knew I'd have to, I can remember to this day, I went to Catholic school and you sat in alphabetical order in rows, and when your reading class came in grade school, you knew which paragraph you were going to have to read. So I'd go down and memorize the paragraph, because nothing freaks out a stutterer more than looking at the printed word on a page, knowing they're going to have to say it publicly. And so I remember the speech, I remember the paragraph. We were reading about Sir Walter Raleigh. To this day, I remember it. And it said, Sir Walter Raleigh was a gentleman. He laid his cloak across the muddy road so the lady would not soil her shoes as she entered the carriage. So it came my turn to speak, to read. Master Bidden. So I started. Sir Walter Raleigh was a gentleman, and he, Master Bidden, what's that word? Gentleman. What's the word, Mr. Biden? And I got up, and which is unusual for a 7th grader in a Catholic school, and walked out of the front of the room. The nun grabbed my arm. I kept walking, and I walked 2 miles home. And I got home, my mother was tapping the table, the dining room table. She said, "Get in the car." Dropped my younger brother on my lap, drove me back to school. I said, "Let me explain, Mom." And I explained to her what happened. Walked into the Mother Superior's office, and she said, "Mother, what happened?" She said, "Joe was just so outrageous. No one's ever shown such disrespect," and so on and so forth. She said, "Did the nun say?" She said, "It's irrelevant, Mrs. Biden." She said, "It's relevant to me. Can Sister Janet come down?" The nun came down, walked through me. I'm sitting in the office of the secretary, and she looks at me like, "You're dead, kid." Walks in, sits down, and they had those frosted glass dividers, and the sun was coming through, and I could hear my mother asked her what happened, and she said how disrespectful I was. I said, "Did you say Biden?" She said, "Mrs. Biden, I was just trying to make a point." My mother, Catherine Junior Finnegan, 5'2" tall, stood up, walked over, and said, "Sister, if you ever talk to my son like that, I'll come back and rip that goddamn bonnet off your head." True story. But the point is, I was really lucky in the second piece I learned. I learned that you need people to give you confidence. Confidence. So every time I walk out of the house, it's not true. My mother said, "Remember, Joey, you're the smartest boy in the class. Remember, Joey, you weren't supposed to know what your IQ was." My mother went and got and showed me my IQ. "Joey, you're the smartest guy in the class." Not a joke. Not a joke, because you have no sense of yourself.
You know, it's very similar to what we've tried to achieve over the decades. And we try to get people to come here to tell them to try to see the world through new eyes. And as you know, if you can only see the world through your eyes and you can't see it through the person you're interacting with, then it's very difficult.
Well, it's one of the things you do all the time. One of the things in negotiating. Now, every person I've ever sat across from, whether it's a head of state or one of my colleagues, the first thing I do, and you do it, or you should respectfully if you don't, I always sit down and say, what is his or her limitation? How far can they go? Realistically, you know, Barack always kids me. Tip O'Neill used to say all politics is local. It's not. All politics is personal. It's all personal, including international as well as national. It's all personal. You got to figure out what are your limitations. We have to make a deal. But if I know that if you make the deal, you're going to lose your leadership position, that's something I can't ask you to do. There's very few people who are willing to appear in the second edition of Profiles in Courage. So I sit there and I say, what do you need to do for me to get you to yes? How about if I go out and say the following and then you slam me for it and you look good? I'm being deadly earnest. Well, what is that, guys? Ladies? It's no different than a marriage. Not a joke. I'm not joking. I'm being deadly earnest. There's a lot of brilliant people, but I know a lot of really stupid, brilliant people. You got to know human nature. That's all it is.
I think so. Joe, let me take you to another place. It was 1974, 75 in America. And my economic theories, my thought of credit, everything had worked out. It was kind of an epidemic at that time. But my father had been diagnosed with melanoma. And so I could refinance thousands of companies. And I traveled around. And within about a year and a half, I knew that there wasn't anything I could do to save my father's life. That science had not moved fast enough to move my father and to save him. And I eventually moved myself and hundreds of people back to California so my two sons would know my father before he died. And we were back about 9 months before he died. Was there a time with your son that you knew that you could not, even though you were the vice president of the United States, move science fast enough to save your son's life?
Yes. My son was the Attorney General of the state of Delaware. When he announced he's running for governor, there wasn't a single Republican who said they'd run against him. When we won re-election in 2012, big headline in the statewide paper, Biden, most popular politician in Delaware, Bo. We had won that year. Seriously. My son didn't have to volunteer to go to Kosovo, but in the middle of the war, he was in Kosovo, helping set up their criminal justice system. He didn't have to go to Iraq, but he went to Iraq for a year, won the Bronze Star, was highly decorated. He was an incredible kid. He was a man, and the finest man I ever knew. And at first he had a stroke. He was misdiagnosed as a stroke, and we thought, my God, what's happened to my boy? He came back the fittest person in his regiment, 9% body fat. He was just an incredible guy. And then it turned out it was a tumor, what they diagnosed as a stroke and a blockage. And it was, when we went to MD Anderson, they told us in August it was stage 4 glioblastoma. We both knew that there was virtually no hope. But my son would say to me, he'd look at me and he'd say, Dad, now look, I'm going to be all right no matter what happens. But you got to promise me you will be. I know no one loves me more than you, but Dad, you got to promise me. So when people ask about me, smile. I don't want anybody feeling sorry for me. God damn it, Dad. Okay? This is a kid who every single day got up and went to his office, even when he had aphasia, even when he couldn't move on his left side. He got up every day and went to work. Because his view was that, I remember there's a wonderful guy named Dr. Young, used to be the head of neurosurgery. Anyway, and when they diagnosed him, we knew what the diagnosis meant. And I said, what do we do, Doc? He said, go home and run for governor. Go home and run for governor. You need a purpose-driven life. You need a purpose-driven life. And for me, what I draw strength from, probably like you do with your father, that I don't think of Bo as ill. I think of Bo as, when he was strong, And I think of Bo in terms of what would he want me to do? Because he'd be doing this if he were alive. He'd be doing this. And so what I look to is I draw strength from the fact that of who he was, and try to think every day, what would he do? What would he be doing? And so for me, it was Bo who would say, you know, call me and say, Dad, now remember, I saw you there. You got to look happier, Dad. No, I really mean it. It was, to him, it was really, really important that he die with dignity, that he not let anybody. My dad had an expression. He'd say, you know, call me a champ, never complain and never explain. I can say without fear of contradiction, I never once from the time that son was born ever heard him complain or explain. I mean, never, never, never. And I look at him and I say, anyway, I don't know whether that's your questions.
I wish you and I were unique, but 1 in 2 American men get cancer and 1 in 3 American women get cancer. So we are not unique, and every single person, I'm sure in this audience or is watching this online anywhere in the world, it's hard to find a person that hasn't been affected with cancer. And how do we accelerate, I think, is the call to action you gave us today. Now, the country that has the most people dying of cancer is China. The country that has going to have the largest medical challenges is China. They've had environmental and other things that have affected them, as you know. Is there a role that you could play? In the first Gulf War, the U.S., as you know, put up 20% of the money, and others put up 80%. And it was managed with General Schwarzkopf and General Colin Powell, etc. Is there a way that you see, and Henry Kissinger played a role, is there a way that you could see today to use your diplomatic skills, because you probably know foreign leaders better than anyone in the world, that we could all come together? They've committed tens of billions of dollars to bioscience. Is there a way you see that you could go to China and other countries around the world and say, let's get together as a team here, and together we could move faster?
Yes, I've already had that discussion with President Xi. We've already have a memorandum of understanding. Now it's a matter of bringing it to fruition. And so one of the things that this Biden Cancer Initiative is going to be is to get those 10 world leaders who have all agreed to participate and pool resources and exchange and collaborate among our scientists, is to get that up and running. There's agreement, it's on paper, but it has to be implemented. And I'm going to say in front of everybody, I'm going to ask this guy to help me to do it. No, I'm not being facetious. I'm being deadly earnest.
I'd be honored to help.
No, I really genuinely mean it, because there's a lot we can do. And by the way, when I very briefly, when I spoke at the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab and all that institution, along with here in the United States, the Aspen Institute, there's a coalescing of really organized people who want to help get this collaboration in real time. For example, that formula, that, anyway, we're running out of time.
Yeah. So I just, there are a lot of young entrepreneurs that have joined us. Today, they might be 60, those young entrepreneurs. At the global conference, the for-profit companies represented employ 40 million people. And many of them remember the day when they started their company. They had a couple desks, and they didn't know if they had the funds to make it work. What I don't think they know is at 29 years old, you left the law firm and formed your own law firm. What were you thinking back then?
You know, think about this, all of you. Isn't it wonderful that when you're young, you didn't know what the dangers were? I went out, I have no money. If you look at my financial disclosure when I was as vice president, the headline in the Washington Post said, quote, "It's probable no man has ever assumed the office of vice president with fewer assets than Joe Biden." You can Google it, it's true. But at any rate, here's the deal. When I was 26, I started my own law firm. I was the only person in the state of Delaware, and I went out and I hired 2 lawyers. I was able to convince the bank at the time to lend me $50,000 to open up a firm. That first year, they each made 20. This was 1969 or 70. They each made 20, and I made 5, and I was a 50% partner. Yet I had to guarantee them 20. And thank God I didn't know what I know now, but I knew that I believed that I had the capacity and could bring something different to the law that was needed at the time in my state at that circumstance, and it turned out to be true. But the thing that and when I announced for the Senate, I didn't have any money, and the Democratic Party, I was 28 years old when I announced. You got to be 30 to win, but the hardest thing to do, and the young entrepreneurs out there know this, is follow your idea and still be able to eat. No, I'm not joking. Not joking. So I'm running for the United States Senate, and I'm still going into court because I literally had to pay the mortgage. I had to put food on the table. It was when people say, "What was the most difficult thing running when you were 29 years old?" It was literally eating. And so, but it's. You all, if you believe it, follow it, man. It's the most satisfying thing in the world. But having to meet a staff requirement, I had only had 5 staff people, and I remember when it got all finished.
And how many of those staff were their last name Biden? None,
but most of them ended with O. I'm big in the Italian community at home. Anyway, so anyway, but it's exciting. It's exciting, and and by the way, you learn from your losses. You learn from your failures too. I mean, it's my dad had an expression. You've heard it. Everybody, when they write about it, they say it. My dad say, "Joey, the measure of success for a man and woman is not whether they get knocked down, it's how quickly they get up. How quickly you get up. Just get up." I have a little thing in a little cartoon. My dad went into one of those card shops, where you buy greeting cards and the like, because I guess I was feeling sorry for myself somewhere about a year after my wife and daughter were killed and my 2 boys were hospitalized. And he walked over, he came over to me, and it's Hagar the Horrible. I'm not a big funny paper guy, but Tim is the cartoon guy. And Hagar is in his and there's 2 frames, Michael. One frame shows Hagar with the ship being sunk, lightning in the sky, and the prow of the ship, the big dragon, and his horned helmet, and he's looking at heaven, and he said, "Why me, God?" And the next frame says, a voice from heaven says, "Why not?" Why not? Look, I was raised to believe, and I still think this about the country. There's not a damn thing we can't do. I really believe it.
And when you were telling that story, I think it was 88, and I was meeting with Gorbachev, and he brought his commissar of industry, and we were in the Russian embassy in Washington. And they wanted to go and they wanted to develop the venture capital business. And what you stated here in America is not only the chance to try, but chance to try again. And so he told me they wanted to go in the venture capital business. They have all this science and education. So I said, Mr. Gorbachev at the time, and the commissar, do you realize that maybe 7 out of the 10 companies fail in venture capital? And he told me, it's not a problem. We'll put them in jail. So I told him, I don't think you're ready for venture capital.
Where you can't breathe free air, you can't do venture capital.
So one last question and we'll close here. I noticed that you were up in New Hampshire. Now I'm assuming it was to see the leaves change. But you know, when a political leader who at 30 years old became the youngest U.S. senator visits New Hampshire, people start to wonder, are you really seeing the leaves change?
Well, actually, the leaves are changing. Mike Barnacle, who's been very generous to me, said he can hardly wait for Biden to, I'm not running, but Biden to run because he wants to follow him in a walker. But look, folks, I really mean it. For me, to use the term today, a purpose-driven life is what makes life worthwhile. So when I was leaving the vice presidency after deciding not to run, Mike, and I was going to run, it's an awful sounding thing to say, but I thought I was the best qualified person at the moment to be president, and I thought I could have won, but circumstances just intervened. You know, reality has a way of intervening. And so what I did was I decided that how could I, the ideal thing for me was how could I continue to work in the things that have animated my life since I was a young lawyer. The reason I started that law firm, Mike, is that I got a job with the White Shoe Law Firm, the oldest firm in the state of Delaware, and the civil rights movement was in full blast. My city had been burned to the ground, part of it occupied by the National Guard. I quit, became a public defender, and opened up a law firm. And so I've been engaged in public policy my whole life. And so what I wanted to do was figure out how I could take the brightest people, the very people who would be peopling the administration that Hillary won, and take them with me to continue the work that I do. And so I had a great opportunity at the University of Pennsylvania. They've renamed, they want me to do foreign policy there, and they gave me $2 million of staff. I have guys like Tony Blinken and others who are Deputy Secretary of State with me. The very people had I run and won who would be the Secretaries of State, the Secretaries of Defense. And they've all agreed to come with me. And then the University of Delaware gave me an opportunity, and they set up a Biden Institute, and they gave me a lot of money to hire any staff I wanted, and I brought in the best domestic people that I have, including economists. And then the Biden Foundation exists, and that's where we started funding the cancer out of and the violence against women and LGBT rights. So I have about $8 million worth of personal staff still that work for me. And so, but one of the things I said I would do when I left was to not only work on the issues to try to fundamentally impact on public policy as we move forward from both an academic and a political standpoint, I also said that I wanted to be part of helping the Democratic Party rebuild itself. And I meant what I said. And so I'm doing, in a limited way, I'm going around the country, and I am raising money for candidates, and I'm trying to, and I am injecting myself in the Democratic Party debate, which is a false debate that's going on now. And that is, in order for the Democratic Party to be relevant again, the argument on one side is we got to just focus on our progressive values, and the other side is no, forget the progressive values because they alienate working class people, and we just focus on the working class. Well, I'm going to say something outrageous. There's nobody that in either party is more popular to me with working class people. I'm middle class Joe. They told me that for years, and it's not meant as a compliment in Washington. It means you're, no, it's not. It means you're not sophisticated. I'm pretty damn sophisticated about what built this country, and the middle class built this country. And so one of the things that I'm doing is I'm continuing to stay engaged and make the point. And by the way, the 36 years I was a senator, I was ranked the third or fourth most progressive senator in those 37 years. I take a backseat to no one on the progressive issues. And I've led on an awful lot of them, whether it's on women's issues or on LGBT issues. But the point is this, there is no conflict. There is no conflict between the two. I did 83 events, I'll end with this. I did 83 events for Hillary. To make the point to the campaign that we were missing a point, I went up to Lorain, Ohio, spoke to 3,000 auto workers on the floor, and I said, watch me, to everyone, watch me.
And I started off, and all these white boys who are supposed to be prejudiced and racist, who, by the way, voted for Barack. And I started off and I said, I'm here to tell you, first and foremost, one of the most important things we have to do is equal pay for women. Cheers, hollering, and the liberals are going, what the hell's that all about? Guess what, the stupid folks? All their wives work. And by the way, when they don't get paid fairly, they're losing part of their standard of living. And then I said, and by the way, who you love should be who you marry. There's none of your damn business beyond that. Everybody stood up and cheered. I mean, these are working class guys, high school educated white guys. And they went nuts. And then I said, and one last thing before I get into talking about the economy. Any man who raises his hand to a woman is a damn coward. And if you don't do something about it, you're an accomplice. Place went nuts because they're looking at their daughters. They're looking at their wives. They're looking at their mothers. We're so damn stupid. We act like there is this inherent conflict. There's none. There's none in the base. There's none.
So, Mr. Vice President, sounds like you're filling up your dance card.
I am.
Before you fill up that entire dance card, it was almost 25 years ago that Colin Powell and his wife joined myself, Lori, and my whole goal was to convince him to lead the war on cancer. And I was unsuccessful. And before you fill up that dance card, we need you to lead the war on cancer. And the present for you and I and everyone is that our children will have to go look up cancer in the textbook. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Michael. I hope that was okay.
Okay, good. You don't have to help.
You're in the first pew. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you. Gil, how are you? I don't think so. I don't know how you do that. Thank you, everybody.
So we ran a little long. There's only 13 sessions starting in 5 minutes. Hustle.